Lord Richards there. Well, let's go live to Chicago and join Ivo Daalder, who is president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. He also served as US ambassador to NATO from 2009 to 2013. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. There was a period last night UK time when there were obviously fears around what had happened on that Ukraine-Polish border. Many will be relieved at what the outcome seems to have been, but it highlights that as long as this war continues, there is a risk of even accidental elevation, expansion of all the risks, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. As long as there's war in the middle of Europe, no one in Europe is safe, and frankly, no one around the world is safe. But it also shows the really important fact that because war creates a fog, we need to find the information before we start spinning out all kinds of scenarios, which is what was happening yesterday on social media and everywhere else about how we would retaliate and where this would end. We needed the facts. And the first thing you do is to establish the facts. And it's taken less than 24 hours for the facts to become clear that this was indeed a Ukrainian air defense missile that mistakenly ended up on Polish territory with really horrible results of killing 2 people. That's the kind of accidents that happen in war, but it isn't the kind of thing that you lead all of a sudden to change your strategy and say, oh my God, let's either push the Ukrainians to end the war as quickly as possible, or let's not support the Ukrainians in their ability to win this war, which is what we've been about for the last 9 months. We just steady ahead. We know what happened. Incidents happen, and let's just move forward without change of course, because the course we're on is the right course.
How long for? Because President Zelensky initially did seem to blame Russia for what happened yesterday before the facts had been established. And there is some frustration, isn't there, in other parts of the world at the huge economic damage, the food shortages and so on that this war is causing.
Yeah, I think President Zelensky would have been better not to make the statements he did and wait, like everyone else, including all the NATO governments, including the Polish government, to find out the facts before making statements. And yes, the war is creating tremendous global ramifications, but it's most of all creating extraordinary damage and inflicting incredible hardship on the people of Ukraine. They didn't ask for this war. They weren't part of a decision to make this war. This was all decided by the Kremlin. It was all executed by the Kremlin. And the way to end this war is very clear. If Russia stops fighting and moves its troops back to Russia, this war will be over. No one wants to fight. No one wants to continue to have the kind of damage that we have seen. And the way to end it is clear. And it would be good if the rest of the world, including all of the leaders of the G20, starting with China and India, were to make clear to Vladimir Putin that both he was wrong to start the war and he now needs to end it. And end it by withdrawing his forces.
OK, but Russia is clearly not looking at all like it's going to do that. And isn't there a danger that this continues for many years? More people are killed, the economic damage grows. And we saw what happened, for example, in Syria and Afghanistan, where effectively the West ended up, in partial retreat. What does complete victory look like on a realistic level, short of Russia completely withdrawing?
It looks like whatever the Ukrainians decide it looks like, because it is their country that has been attacked. And it's their country that is suffering the brunt of the damage. And yes, there are higher prices. And yes, we're paying more for electricity in Europe and around the world. But the people in Ukraine are the ones who are suffering greatest. And they're deciding how far and how long they want to fight. It really isn't up to us to tell the Ukrainians how to do this.
It is up to the Western governments, the US taxpayer, the European taxpayer, because the publics are funding this war in part, and therefore
yes,
a never-ending open-ended battle with no clear end game in sight. Surely that is not politically sustainable.
Well, to date it is, and support for public support in Europe, in the United States, in the Western world for continuing to support Ukraine is very, very high, 2 to 3 to 1 in most countries. And it isn't true that this is a stalemate. This is a steady win by the Ukrainians on pushing back the Russian forces, first in Kyiv back in April, in Kharkiv back in September, and now in Kherson. The only regional capital that the Russians captured is liberated and free. This war is not in a stalemate. It's not necessarily going to take many, many years. The Russians are losing this war. The Ukrainians are doing well, in part because of the Western assistance that we had. And to pull the plug at this point and say to the Ukrainians, I'm sorry for the 9 months of damage. I'm sorry for the hundreds of thousands that have been killed. I'm sorry for all what you've gone through, but we're no longer willing to help you. It's just unconscionable. This is not the world we want to live in. This is a war of aggression. We need to defend them.
Ivo Daalder, thank you very much indeed for joining us.